The unavoidable reality is that each testimony from every survivor from now forward is more precious with each passing day.
Amen.
But of course, there can be no bearing of witness unless people of goodwill and a desire to receive the testimony come to hear it. So the biggest thank you goes to each and every one of you who made the effort to be here. Thank you very much. As you know, my name is Bruce Wechsler, and I am the youngest child of Jeannie Parnes Wechsler. And yes, my mom will freely remind anyone that I am the baby. My mom was herself the baby of her family, the youngest of 7 children. And she indeed was just a baby, a toddler, when the Nazis marched toward her hometown in eastern Poland. Her parents' names were Esther and Samuel Parnes, my grandparents. Mom's here today to share with you some of her memories from the war. Most notably, painfully, and also miraculously are the stories she would tell about those initial several months of flight from right under the stomping feet, planes, and tanks of Hitler's demon army. In the final analysis, her family's story is an amazing account of survival against all odds. The entire Parnes family, Esther and Samuel and all 7 children, lived to tell their tales. For that reason, our Holocaust story is strikingly unique, as not one single member died during the war. Indeed, it is that difference that makes it harder for us to talk about it, particularly in large groups. Survivor's guilt, you've heard of. Why did we survive when so many perished? That feeling strongly pushes and nags at us to just keep our mouths shut and be happy that we're the ones that did. And not run the risk, God forbid, of seeming to be gloating about our good fortune. We fight that internal battle a little every time before we get up here. But there are 3 key reasons that help make sure we fight that temptation to stay silent. First, while the ending of the Parnes story is certainly a happier one than most Holocaust stories, what my family endured and experienced during the war was anything but. And those stories need to be shared as much as any other Shoah testimonials. Many believe we have an obligation to do so. Secondly, explaining in depth the manner in which the Parnes family dealt with the outrageous difficulties provides priceless lessons in the importance of family togetherness and looking out for one another. Finally, and most importantly to me, it's because humanity has a responsibility to itself and its future to remember the utter horror and senseless death and destruction that result when hatred and bigotry are tolerated and its forces are unleashed. This is our way of carrying out that responsibility. Our story was preserved in a book completed and published 20 years ago. It's entitled One Step Ahead. You will soon hear why that title is so accurate. And we'll have copies available for purchase at the end of the program for anyone interested. Any funds my mother gets, she just buys more books. So before I introduce you to the person you really want to hear from, allow me to set the scene for you from the large picture, geopolitical standpoint, so to say, so my mom can just jump right into the personal stories. You may know that Poland, or may not know, I needed to brush up on my geography too. Poland is essentially a little bit north, but right between Russia and Germany. So before the actual war broke out between Nazi Germany and Communist Russia, those 2 countries under Hitler and Stalin divided the country of Poland between them, with Germany taking the western part and Russia taking the eastern part. It was what was called the Hitler-Stalin Pact, also known as the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. Hitler-Stalin's easier. It was August 1939. Hitler, of course, never intended to keep or honor that deal in the long run. He was intent on attacking and destroying Russia to succeed where Napoleon had famously failed. Now, the main strategic purpose of this pact, from Hitler's perspective, was just to buy more time to get the German army prepared to beat Stalin. For some reason that no earthling will ever be able to explain to me, Stalin believed him, and he thought he would keep the pact. And so the other strategic advantage was the element of surprise that Hitler gained when he finally turned his guns on an underprepared Russia. The Parnes family lived in a small town in eastern Poland, the Russian-occupied part, when Hitler finally broke the pact and invaded eastern Poland from the west. It was called Operation Barbarossa. It was June 1941. The town's name was Skalit. It had a total population of 8,000 people, and about 5,000 of them were Jews. My mom was 3. When word started coming around that the Germans were invading Poland, the Jews in Skalit went into a panic about what to do. In World War I, when Germany invaded the first time, they weren't interested in the Jews or in small towns. The forces marched through, continued on. Many thought the same would happen again. As a result, a very large percentage of the residents of Skalit did not leave. The terrible tale of what they experienced was memorialized very soon after the war in a book also aptly titled, unfortunately, Death of a Shtetl. Shtetl is a small Jewish community, not necessarily Jewish, but predominantly. It is one of the earliest and very comprehensive accountings from various survivors' viewpoints that the aggregator could find of how Hitler's demons systematically destroyed the Shtetl for all time. Except for some small bands of Jews from Skalit who ran into the woods and lived all during the war, hiding in the woods, virtually every Jew from that town perished at the hands of the Nazis and other anti-Semites. A large number were slaughtered in organized actions before the large open pits that you've heard about. Others were tortured, others worked to death. The locals were involved as well. Some of the Ukrainians and Poles begged the Nazis for permission to go do what the Nazis wanted to do. They even did it with more energy in some ways. The Germans were a little bit more sterile about what they would do. At the start of that book, Death of a Shtetl, and my mother has a copy of it here, Mr. Weisbrod, who put together the book, explains the situation as news of Germany's invasion was spreading through the town. He wrote, quote, "From the first days of the war, the town was gripped by a wild, nervous mood. Instinctively, we knew that momentous events were about to occur. Soviet authorities sought to maintain the calm of the population while they themselves were preparing to evacuate. When the Soviets began their orderly withdrawal of the town, they were accompanied by just some 200 Jews, mostly workers, craftsmen, and some who simply had good sense and clear vision. I stress clear vision because very few Jews fully understood the danger awaiting them," unquote. So that's the only reference to my family in the book. I don't know if they had clear vision, but they were part of the 200. They escaped, quite literally, within hours before escape would be impossible. My grandmother had bright and fiery red hair. One of her nicknames in Yiddish was Esther da Reite, Esther the Red One. And though her marriage to Samuel was a real partnership, his nickname was Mickey, by the way, in case I say Mickey by mistake, my grandfather. It was a real partnership, but she wore the pants in the family, let's say. She was a true matriarch. So what made Esther da Reite decide to pack up the family on a horse and buggy and leave on that day? Was it superior information about how the Jews were being treated by the Nazis a few miles west? Was it the good sense and clear thinking that Mr. Weisbrod referred to? There may have been some of that, but by and large, no, that wasn't the most compelling factor in her decision. Her oldest son, my oldest uncle Moshe, had 3 very big strikes against him. He was about 17 when the war started. First, he was disabled. He had a clubbed foot. Second, he was a socialist, or maybe even a communist. And third, of course, he was Jewish. So in June of 1941, as word came about that the Nazis were coming, some of the local Polish and Ukrainian thugs swore to him that when the Nazis arrived, he'd be the first one that they would denounce and deliver to the Germans. And he believed them, as he should have. And so he decided to escape by bicycle to a relative who lived in a much more remote village in the woods farther east. Just for a few days, he thought, till everything would blow over. And he was about to leave. He ran into my Aunt Sally, the second oldest, and they were very close. Also ran into a friend of Moshe and Sally, with whom Sally was enamored. You'll hear about that. And the three of them decided to go together, or they insisted on going with him. So that's what made Esther's decision for her. When she heard that two of her children had gone off to war alone, not off to war, but gone off alone into the night, into uncertainty, and during the war, the decision was made, we have to go and get them. Kids don't know what they're doing. We have to stay together. On top of that, that local boy, Azriel, the devilishly handsome boy, was from the wrong side of the tracks. They didn't like him for their salad. They disapprove, and yet our survival owes itself to that story of forbidden love. We recently lost both Azriel and Sally several months apart. They were married for 70 years. My grandmother thought we would be returning to Skala once they found the kids. Somehow, amid the growing panic throngs of Jews fleeing in almost all directions, they found Moshe, Sally, and Azriel, but they would never return to Skala. There was no turning back. The next 3.5 months of ongoing escape ever eastward toward Russia on foot and by horse and buggy, often with large caravans of other immigrants, are both horrifying and heartbreaking, yet also full of miracles. Time and again they faced disaster and complete annihilation. Time and again, unscathed. A fiction writer would not dare spin such a story, too beyond believability. Though only about 4 years old at the time, my mom has strong and vivid memories from this period of escape, and that's the period she'll be focusing on. The remaining years of the war after that, though not under perpetual bombardment, posed one extreme challenge and threat after another, replete with disease, hunger, and heartache. Esther de Reuter's great wish was that their exceedingly unlikely but true stories be recorded and passed on. My mother has taken the realization of that wish and put it upon her own shoulders as her own. But Mom has added her own purposes to it, to teach and remind the youth, and us older kids, of the beauty of life, to remind everyone of the tragedy that results from senseless hate, to encourage each of us to strengthen our hearts against hatred and to speak out against it whenever, wherever, and however it raises its ugly head. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor and privilege to introduce you to the youngest child of Esther and Mickey Parnes, my mom, Jeannie Parnes Wechsler.
So I'm just going to speak from the heart. And thank you, before I forget it again, for coming and for listening to our story and stories. And hopefully you will pass them on to younger generations, because that is the most important thing for me, for these stories to be told. So I'm going to start. First of all, I want to thank the rabbi and his wife, and it was a great, great miracle that we met, and I really, really love you in my life, and I hope we stay together for a long time. Thanks for the song, which I was going to ask you to sing, but you sang it anyway. Okay, I'm going to reiterate some of the stuff that can you hear me?
Yes.
That my son told you. And I was 4 years old, like he said, when the war started. And I was a toy in the house for my whole family. I often used to think after the war that I didn't contribute anything for our survival. You know, I was a kid. But then when they started writing the book and each one started explaining how at the worst times I would dance for them, I would sing for them and entertain them, and hey, I did do something, right? And live in their spirit. So, yeah. The first thing that I remember is my father being very upset. My father was such a quiet, gentle soul, he wouldn't hurt a fly at the wall. And all of a sudden he's screaming and angry at my older sister, the one my son said. Because a younger sister that ran into them came home, they sent her home to tell my parents that Sally and Moshe left. And she said, I saw Sally and Moshe on the bicycles and Azriel. And the minute this word came out, Azriel, my father just blew a cork. So did not want this boy. Like my son said, he didn't come from the kind of background that my father was hoping for Sally. She was beautiful and had a gorgeous voice. And oh yeah, my parents were Jewish actors in the Jewish theater. And when Sally got a little bit older, after the Russians came in, she was also acting. And this Azriel used to go to see her, and there, you know, what happens between a 17 and a 15-year-old girl, which was not an accepted thing in those days, especially in the Jewish community. So, my father was very upset, and my mother didn't know what to do, because the week before, my father brought home a guest for Friday night. You know, Jewish people have the Friday night dinners, so we also had one. And he brought him home, and after everybody left the table, I was sitting in her lap. I can hear my mother tell the story over and over. A lot of the stories I remember myself, but mostly my mother made me and my sister repeat it, because when the war will be over, we go back home, we'll be able to tell it to our families, not knowing what was happening back home. So where was I? My father brought home this man, and when everybody left the table, my mother said to him, what exactly is this Hitler doing that is so terrible? Because our side was so naive, and nobody knew what was happening on the side where Hitler was. And he says, you see your child sitting on your lap? When Hitler comes in, the first thing he does is separates the children from the parents. And she remembered that. And with that in mind, what should she do? Leave the kids at home and run to find Sally and Moshe? And if she does that, what's going to happen to us? And if she leaves us, if she takes us, what's going to happen to us on the way? However, my father's mother was sitting there, my Bobby. You know what Bobby means?
Grandma. My grandmother was sitting there, and she said to my mother, ask the kid, you have to go and bring her back. Who knows what the soldiers are going to do to her, because the Russian soldiers were already on the way back to Russia. Who knows what it's a beautiful girl, you have to go and bring her back. And my father, no. My mother we lived under the Russians at the time. And the Russians, when they came in, they confiscated everything from the wealthy people, and he'd shake his head, so he must be familiar. And for poor people like us, we were a very poor family. My father was a poor tailor, and we lived in one room that belonged to my grandmother. Had a little house with a straw roofs. And in one room we lived, in the other room my mother's sister lived. Anyway, we were very poor, and so when they came in, what they did is they took from the rich and they helped the poor, and we were the poor, and so they helped us with a little house. We thought it was a palace. But anyway, so the Russians were the head, and the Russians were leaving, and they announced on speakers that they are leaving, there won't be anybody to protect us, that we should, whoever wants to leave with them, they will provide help, transportation meaning. And my mother ran to them, and this I so remember clearly. She went to this man that used to come to the place, and he was in charge, and he saw her. What can I do for Sally's mother? And she told him that she wants to go bring her back, but we have nothing to go with. So he saw a carriage approach with the Ukrainian guy sitting on it, and he called him over, asked for his passport, told him, take this lady, do what she wants you to do, and then when you come back, I'll give you the passport back. And she came home with him. I remember the excitement for me, my sister, my brother. We were kids. Who was ever on a horse and buggy? It's like being on a plane for today's kids, maybe even more. My mother, and by then some family came, they tried to help out, to pack up a few things. Anyway, we got in the wagon, my father's not going. And as we started leaving, of course, my father decided to go. Okay. We traveled through the night, and like my son said, we're looking for them, we can't see them, but because my brother had a club foot, and the sole of his shoe was round, and we passed by a chicken farm with low coops, not far, so as we passed, she said, so go back, because she sees something with the feet, like, they were to us with the soles. And we reunited. It was bittersweet, they were crying and laughing, and it was terrible. And we're going back home. My sister was crying, I wanted to go home anyway. As we start turning the carriage around, we hear noise from planes. And if you ever saw a lot of birds flying together, that's what it looked like. And it was a lot of planes over hundreds and hundreds of people gathered up going the same way. There was no other way to go to Russia but that direction. And they started bombing. And I tell you, what I remember seeing, all the dead people around me, the horses with their hoofs, what do you call it? There was a Orthodox man with, what do you call those undergarments with the tzitzis? And he was laying there, and his stomach was open, and his boy was laying on his knees, dead, into him. It's not anything that I can ever get out of my mind. There was a little girl that I used to play with her from the carriages, you know how when you drive close. I didn't realize there were kids here. It's okay?
It's okay.
So I'm not going to tell you what I saw with the little girl, because imagine what can happen to a little girl when a bomb falls on her. That's what I saw. And everybody around, and feathers are flying like it's snowing, and it's awful. And the point I'm trying to make out is our carriage, among all these devastations, or for a better word, I don't know, our carriage stood without anybody hurt on it, without a nail. How did that happen? That was the first time. I have really thought about it until I got in my old age. I mean, yeah, the stories, but all these people in the wedding and nobody, we're standing, we're not running away, it's just not happening. That was our first miracle. From there on, we kept traveling. We couldn't go back because the Germans were there already. So we kept traveling, and we always found a place where to rest for the night. This particular time, that is my story, and I remember it so well. We all went into like an empty piece of land, and we started bedding down, and we heard planes come. And we were not alone. There were a lot of people there with carriages and however. When that happened, each adult grabbed a child and ran for cover. Ran someplace to hide doesn't mean that the bomb can't get you there, but that's what you do. And my oldest brother, who had a problem, put me under his arm, and as a little girl, that was my first awareness that he's limping. At home, I didn't realize it. Ran in with me into a barn where cows were, and he laid me down next to him. And the cow was standing with her tail towards me, and of course she had to move her tail and touched my face, and I was so scared, and I started crying. And my brother put me on his chest, and I lay there through the night. And I often feel I'm still there. His love, his tenderness, his protection just made me feel so safe. And we slept through the night. In the morning, it got quiet. He picks me up, he walks out with me into the field. Imagine the devastation of so many dead people laying around, and their horses and the carriages, and from every corner of that field comes a member with a child in their hand, and my parents are standing and waiting, and from everywhere we all were saved. Nobody was touched, not a nail, and we all came out towards my parents. Even the horses weren't touched. How did that happen? Yeah. It is over and over again. It's amazing. We are on a bridge that we have to cross with. I mean, as we kept going further, other things happened, but I'm telling you the big things that I remember. We came to a bridge, I think, the Dnieper, I don't know if any one of you heard. Anyway, so we have to cross the bridge, not just us, all the people that were in that caravan. And it took a long time because it was very slow moving. And as we get, and it took a very long time. And as we come close to getting off the bridge, we hear the planes come, and they bomb the bridge breaks, and everybody on the bridge falls in and drowns. And we got off. How? So going back to this love affair with my brother-in-law, later became, we're all on this horse and buggy, and again we come to a point where we have to cross a bridge. We have to cross the water because the bridge was broken. And there are people in front of us, and their carriages turned over already, and people are drowned, and they are around there. And my brother-in-law was the one that was driving the horses. And I just want to tell you that without him, I wouldn't be standing here. And he takes the reins and he starts moving, and as we came into the middle, the back wheel jerked to the front, and the horse stood up. I remember seeing him up the back, and we're afraid it's
The wagon was
we're
stuck.
gonna drown.
The wagon was stuck.
The wagon was stuck. Thanks. So this Azrael jumps into the water and he sees that the wheel is stuck between two rods. And he comes up to tell my mother, the wheel is stuck, and my mother, please do what you can to save my children. And he goes back and with his shoulder lifts up the whole carriage. And the wheel comes out and jerks and gets in the carriage, and we were saved. Why? Because he saved us. So when we handed out the books 20 years ago, my son, who is, I have to say, very talented in different ways, but he's also a painter, and he painted that scene in oil for him as a gift, where he's lifted up the whole family. Thank you. Bruce. One time, this is also my story, we stopped, we heard planes fly, planes coming, and you know, I used to know by the sound if it's a Russian plane or if it's a German plane. And so I used to get scared when I heard the planes come, and my older sibling said, Geniela, which was my Jewish endearing name. In Russian, they would say, "Это наши или не наши?" This is ours or not ours? And I would know by the sound whether it's a Russian was ours and a German. So we passed by an orchard, cherries were growing, and we hear the planes. And this is just telling you about my mother. I don't have a chance to tell you as much as I want to about the personalities of the family, but my mother was very strong, and she was pregnant also, we found out later, and the most important thing was to feed the family. So when we heard the planes come, we went on this orchard, and there were, trenches like what the soldiers have. So I feel it. Somebody holding me with my little hands and putting me down into the trench. And the whole family and other people too, not just us. But my mother knew that her children are hungry. She walked around the field by the trees, picked up her dress, and pulling cherries down from the trees and brought them to us, so we have something to eat. Oh yeah. So earlier in the trip, we passed by a farm, and it had a barn, a small one, or a hut. And so we got off, and everybody went inside that hut for the night. And through the night, planes were coming and bombing. Bombing and bombing and bombing. And the ceiling fell down, the wall broke. That's how close we were to the fire. In the morning, it got quiet. My brother Izzy went outside to look around. And after a while, he came back and took my mother's hand. He says, "Kim, Mama, come, Mama, I'll show you." And he walks a little bit, and they see a bomb that didn't go off. Wow. He walks a little further, another bomb. Around the hut, 7 bombs that didn't go off. And it's in the book. You read. And my mother said it was meant one for each of my children, and called out by the name Moshe Pasalifer.
You know, I hate to repeat myself, but, and I'm getting older, I'm 81 years old, and who knows what tomorrow brings. I just can't, the older I get, the harder it is for me to fathom. I can't wrap my head around how that really happened. With all, it wasn't like one time that happened, but it comes in 3.5 months. One time my sister wanted we stopped and waited for a train. And my sister was 2 years old, and we always went together, like behind bushes or whatever, but not to walk away from the wagon. And this particular time, she asked me if I'd go with her to look for a drink of water. She always was thirsty. I feel, now I understand that I must have felt guilty for saying no, because we always went together, because I, as a kid, knew we're not allowed to walk away far from the wagon. And everybody did their own thing, whatever. Time to go to the train. And Dovel is not there. And the older siblings said, we have to go anyway. No, my mother said, no, we're not going without her. So Azrael jumped on the horse, and he went to look. How far can she go? She's a little girl. And by the time he found her, she had walked up to a house. A woman was sitting outside with a baby and asked for a drink of water. The woman left her with the child, and she went in, and by the time she came out with a cup of water, my brother-in-law scooped her up so she didn't have a chance to get the water, but by the time he brought her back, the train left. And my mother wouldn't let us go without her. And we continued on. And guess what we found on the road? A bombed train. Train that we were supposed to be on. Was demolished, people laying all over dead, and maybe some survived, I don't know, but we would have been on the train, who knows? And we kept going until we came far enough where we didn't hear any more planes. But there are many other stories that I don't can. The story is a love story. Because if it wouldn't be for my sister Sally going away with this boy who in my father's mind was always that she ran away with him. But that wasn't true. He met them, and he also said, where do you go? And they tell him, and he said, what? You know what the soldiers are going to do to you, beautiful young girl? On a one bike, he says, if you really want to go, wait here and I'll go and get us bikes. So where did he get the bikes? And that kind of sets the stage to know that he's capable of stealing, he's capable of, he killed for us, he stole for us, he protected us, and thank you. And the little ones were just in love with him. We wanted just to sleep near him because he felt safer. And I just love them. And my parents never accepted what happened between them. Sally paid such a heavy price. For 5 years, my father would blame her. You see, the kids are starving. It's because of you. You ran away, we ran after. We didn't know what's going back home, what we're running from. See, you took the kids away from the safety. Because of you, the kids are this and that. And she suffered, the poor thing. So going back to finishing with our carriage, and the Russians took all these refugees and provided trains for free. But they sent us where they had room for us. Did they have room? No. So we wound up in the Urals. You ever heard of the Urals? Yeah, it's cold there. And we left in June. This is 3.5 months later. Fall is coming. And the fall comes very fast there. We came unprepared, no clothes, because we only left for a day. And so we lived there for a little bit, and it wasn't that bad because there were potatoes and things were growing, and the adults got little jobs from the kolkhoz. They're,
Communal farm.
Huh?
Communal farm.
Communal farm under the communists, and everything belongs to the communists. And so somebody suggested to my father that we should go to Uzbekistan because it's a warm climate there, like Florida. And the main town was Tashkent. So we wanted to go to Tashkent. There were a lot of refugees there, a lot of Jewish people. But by the end we got on the train, they gave us permission and we went. And when we got there, they wouldn't take us off the train to stay there because they didn't have enough room. They were full of people. And they sent us to a little village called Kakant. And in that village, they didn't have room for us, so they took animals out of a barn and put us in. And there were 2 beds made out of hay for the men and for the women. And they grew cotton there. The farms were cotton. Can you eat cotton if you steal a little bit? No. We were there for 9 months. Within the 9 months, my mother had a child when she had typhus. All of us, because of no food and because of no clean water, we were all sick. Everybody had dysentery, typhoid, malaria. My mother gave birth to her 10th child, not knowing that she's giving birth. She had so much fever. And I forgot what it was, but anyway. So in the same place, it was absolutely, we couldn't stay there. And one time, we were all swollen like little Biafra pregnant girls, my sister and everybody. And one time everybody went to the field because they gave you a piece of land to finish for the day for the family. So all the adults that weren't healthy enough went to work on that land. And when the day was over, you stood in line and they gave you some food or soup or whatever. And my mother brought it home, and my job and my sister Tina's was to find the young grass. And my mother would boil it, and throw the water out, and put the grass into to make more food. So of course he did the job on us. And but one time I was home with my mother, with my father and my sister. He was so swollen he couldn't go, and the door was open because it was very hot there. I remember laying in the straw bed with my sister and crying, I'm so hungry. And she would say, shh, don't say you're hungry, because she was older, she understood we didn't have any food. And my father, you have to understand, my father, I never heard his voice raised other than when he found out Sally left, or on the way when he was angry with her. He closed the door and he ran, I can see him, ran after with a piece of clothing.
Mom, you forgot to say that a bird flew.
Oh, I did? The most important. So when the door was open, a bird flew in. My father first closed the door and started running after the bird. And I can see him in his, at the time the men wore these underwear that had buttons here. Yes. So I can see him climbing and trying to get the bird. When he got the bird, he asked me and my sister to go look for our toy pot. It was a little green toy pot and white inside that we picked up somewhere as a toy. And my father asked us that when my mother comes, not to tell her that he killed the bird to feed us. And he killed the bird and he cooked it in this little pot and we ate it. But what does a 4 or 5-year-old do when somebody tells her, don't tell your mother? What's the first thing she does? So as soon as my mother walked in, Mommy, Mommy, Daddy killed the bird. And my mother started crying, of course. And she said, if we came to a point that this gentle soul who can't hurt a fly in the wall has to kill a bird to feed his dying children, we have to get out of here or else we will all die. And they started working on it, and they had to, at night, steal away the 3 older ones that left originally. You can't just decide you want to go. The government has to give you permission to go from one place to another. And so they ran away at night, and it took time, and they made it back to where we first came. And they eventually settled down with a little bit help from the people that they knew before we left, and got us papers, sent papers to bring us back. So, okay. So you'll remind me where I finished, because I want to tell you that they used to give us pitas. We didn't know what pitas was. We called it bread. But there was no bread, because they don't eat bread, they eat pitas. Here I learned it, not there. And so my father went with my brother Izzy with this paper to the office or whatever you want to call it, and he walks in, and the guy sitting there looks at the paper, and he looks at my father, and he said, you have to come back next week. He comes back next week again with my brother Izzy, and in the office near him, over here, is sitting a man and working. And the man realized that my father doesn't know that you have to bribe them in order to get it signed. So the man was a Jewish man, and he said in Hebrew quietly, Amchu. You know what that means, Amchai. It's a Jewish. And when my father went out of the office with my brother, he also went out, and as he passed him by, he said in Yiddish, you have to give him something, you have to put something in. Where is he going to get it? He doesn't have the money to buy a piece of bread. He goes out with my brother Izzy, and they walk, and he's too tired to walk. So they decide to sit down and rest, and when they sit down, my father finds a wallet on the floor. So next time they went back, my father put him in his hand, shook hands with him, and we got the papers, and we left. And we came back. There's a whole story, the book will tell you, those that will read it. And we came back to where they were. Meanwhile, they drafted my brother Izzy and my father. My father was sent to Chirkalov, which is the main town in the Urals. And so he lived there in a like in a factory, but they provided place to live for those that couldn't. And we stayed in a little village. Azriel was drafted, and they sent him away for a couple of weeks to train. And when he finished the training, they gave him a 3-day leave. So he came back to the village. My father was not with us, and he talked Sally into going to get married. And in Russia at the time, you just went into the office and you signed in and you were married. So they came back to my mother, and we lived in a little place. I remember I was laying on a bed or cot, who knows. But anyway, so when they came and told my mother that they got married, my mother said, well, if they married anyway, may as well have a Jewish wedding. And there was a Jewish man there that knew the brothers. So she brought him to the house. So I remember laying under the bed and looking up while they were doing this procedure, and they were holding something white like a towel because they didn't have the, what do you call it? A hoover. And so the next day was the last day. He has to go back. And he goes back, and the train gets stuck, and he's late to come back on time to the army. And the police take him off the train, and he got 5 years in jail.
Oh, wow.
So, of course, my sister was very, very unhappy. And she kept sending it. So no, and eventually we moved from this small village to where my father was, which was a bigger city. And they gave us a room in a building that they built for refugees. It were just rooms, like a motel. And there were a lot of different Jewish people in it, and so were we. And once we came there, my father was able to come home every weekend. And Sally keeps writing letters to him, and she doesn't get any answer. So when we were in the little village, she got answers from him. But once we came to the big city, she didn't get any letters, and everybody said, you see, I told you, he's not for you. My mother said, he must have found somebody there, and he's not even thinking of you, and you're not eating, and every cent that she made was to send him packages, and she was with rags on her feet, and you know, it hurt my parents to see her like that. And again, you did it dirty, it's your fault, it's for... And I was put in a home for the last 18 months of being there. Through the 5 years, that was the best time of my life. A clean bed, 3 meals, little ones, but meals, and everybody was dressed the same. It's from the government. P.S. Time goes on, and in the same building where we lived another family with a brother. His name was Moshe. And he had a very big crush on my sister Sally. But Sally loved Israel. She didn't want any romances with anybody. She wanted whom she loved. So one day, the war ended, and I remember them taking us to a window to see, like in July, the colorful things, the fireworks, and we never saw it as the kids. So in the middle of the night, they woke us up to look through the window, and I was so excited. And did we understand what it means? No, it was pretty. And she doesn't hear from Israel. One day, Sally, Clara, who was by then 15, the one that was 13. She was 11, I'm sorry. And they're going someplace where they have to shortcut through a fence. The fence, people made a hole to go through. And they have to go through, and they see this beggar, dirty, filthy, the hair not shaved, yeah. And they're waiting on the side, and he's bent down to climb through that hole. And when he stands up, it's Azrael. And so Clara and Moshe were already in the back, and they came home, and it was great. And they had a separate room. They didn't live with us in the same building. And there was a man from our hometown that we found him in Russia, that we saw each other. He worked for a hospital, deliveries. I remember he once dropped off a piece of wood and was scared he shouldn't get arrested, like that. Anyway, what was his name? Bernice says his brother. No, whatever. He passed away. He got a letter from his sister that survived that small town that they lived in the woods. And after the war, people tried to find each other and to connect in different ways. And she found where her brother was, and she wrote him a letter. And he brought the letter to us. My mother and father were home. And in the letter it says what happened in our hometown, what this book says. Everybody was killed. There's nobody, not a one from our family or anybody's, except those that were hiding in the... My parents realized that if it wouldn't have been for Sally and Israel, we wouldn't have survived. And they went and apologized. And he was the best son ever. And he did everything for everybody. And eventually, they opened the gates to let the immigrants to go back home. But when we came to our hometown on the train, and you ask the people standing there, is there anybody left from the Parnes family? And they said, not one Jew is left. Everybody's dead. So did we want to stay here? No. So we kept going further with the same train, and they brought us to different places, and we could have gone off whatever we wanted, but we picked the oldest, of course, the oldest siblings, picked a place, Bat Cordova. It was a resort place before the war. And they took you around to pick a house that was taken away from the Nazis. And we came to this, I remember because I was older, we opened the door, come in the smell of old rotten potatoes, because when they took the people out, somebody was sitting and peeling potatoes. So the water and the black potatoes were there and rotten. And of course, they cleaned up whatever, that's not the point. But as my brother Isley started looking around, he sees the door opens up, oh, there's steps. And I, of course, schlepped after him. And when we came down into the basement, there was a small black room where photographers used to do, what do you call it? Yeah. And so we come in, and there are strings with clips, pictures, and films atrás, por atrás. 1 minute. The pictures were 2 Nazis
holding their little child by each leg. Imagine what I didn't want to say in front of the kid, but imagine what they were doing to that child. And everything was hanging out, and on the wall was also a picture with hitting a kid against the wall with the head, and on top it said, "And so it shall be done with Jewish children," but in German. And on the side was a bag that my brother found with soap, light green soap, made of Jewish children. My mother, father, all of us, like said Shiva, and we went to the organization, because right away there was a Jewish organization taking care, working with the Hayas. I don't know if you've heard of the Hayas, a Jewish organization that helped the people that were like me. And we gave it to them. My mother wanted them to pass it on, to be witnessed, to be saved, because it was so fresh after the war. People didn't really think that much about it. They thought about themselves. But my mother felt that it needs to be given to, maybe taken to Israel or to whatever. And so she went to them. And we lived there for a couple of months, but on the Russian side. And that's where I learned how to speak Polish and how to dial, personal little things. And people started finding out how to cross illegally the border to the American side. Young men started making a living off it because they would go and meet these people that are at the border and say, "Yeah, I'm going to come back tomorrow, then and bring you some, what was he supposed to, the most important thing to bribe with was American cigarettes, Palmal. That was the best. So where do you get it? You have to find American soldiers that have some cigarettes, that are willing to barter or whatever. So my adult, like the same people, by then, my sister Clara, who was 13 when the war started, 11 when the war started, and 15, the guy that liked Sally changed over to Clara. It's okay. She was a young kid, and but eventually when they came to America, they became millionaires, chemist, whatever. And so he, Azrael and my brother, everybody except my mother and the 3 younger ones stayed back at home. And they went to check out and see if they'll be able to meet up somebody that will take a bribe or what we have to do to get to the other side. And so they went, and they knew they had to bring cigarettes, and they did do what they set out to do. And 2 people came back for us, and the other adults crossed over. I'm almost done. Just want to... But anyway, they came back for us. I just want to tell you about my father. They came back for us, and they said to my father, pack very, very little, dress the kids several times, and take very little because it has to look like we're going for a morning outing. And don't tell anybody. because they, at the border, said that they're going to come back 7 people, and they brought enough cigarettes to give for the 7 people. But you see, my father had a very good friend, and he just couldn't leave him behind. He had a son, and he said, listen, hi, and whatever, this and this is going to happen, come in the middle of the night, and you'll come with us. Okay. But you see, he also had a good friend. And so before you knew it, there were 22 people. And my brother came in, I can take everybody, and this, and my father stood in front of everybody. That's when he was a hero to me. Stood like this in front of all the people. He said, either everybody goes or nobody goes. They had to take everybody, and whoever had whatever to bribe. But we made it, we came to the other side, an American truck was waiting for us, and then I have to come back again to tell you the story about the DP camps, because it stayed too long. But that's when Better Life started, and the war was over, and thank you so much.
There was one story that you did mention that I thought was a good one, and that was where you were asking people if you could stay in their barn, and they said, get out of my barn, and they had to leave, they left the barn, and as they were traveling away from the barn, a plane came and bombed that whole area. Everybody would have been killed in the barn, the house, everything was gone, but they were also, because they had been thrown out by the owner who stayed in
The
the
owner
barn.
got killed with the house.
Yeah.
So was he an angel or a devil? What do you think? A lot of sin or
Well, you know, it's funny. I just want to mention before we close, I want to mention something just a little bit. This week's portion is called Acharei Mot, which is after the death of Aaron's sons. And, you know, they compromised and there was a problem. And they were killed by God. But later on, it talks about something else. It talks about the scapegoat. Now, you know, Jews are always the scapegoat, wherever you go. In a way, Ezra was a scapegoat because he said it was his fault until later they found out different. But there's a different kind of scapegoat that it talks about in this week's portion. And it's called the Azazel, which is they would take the 2 goats and one would be sacrificed and the other would be sprinkled, and they would put their hand on the head of that goat, and they would transfer, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would transfer during Yom Kippur, he would transfer, as it were, the sins of the people, and then it would go out into the wilderness. And so the scapegoat that God provided is different than the scapegoat. We usually think about a scapegoat as something that gives somebody else the excuse for why they did what they did. It's their fault, it's not my fault. But in a way, the portion this week speaks about the sacrifice as being the scapegoat provided by God, where they acknowledged their sins, they acknowledged their shortcomings and failures. They transferred that, and God allowed that to be the one to carry the sin, which speaks of the sacrificial system and all of that. It also says that the life of the flesh is in the blood, and God gives it on the altar to make atonement for sin. And that's also where it's permeating throughout the Torah, throughout the Scripture, and we see also from a Messianic standpoint those things as well. But I was thinking, though, that in life, people seem to be labeled as scapegoat and end up being the hero. In one sense, somebody who was thought of as the one who ruined everything turned out to be the one who saved everything. You know, we look and we say from a Messianic standpoint, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. It says in Zechariah, in the Hebrew Scriptures, it says, they will look upon whom they have pierced and mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. All of a sudden, the scapegoat, all of a sudden, the one who is, as they say, if it was the bad guy, they say, oh, he's the goat. He's the black sheep of the family. Turns out to be the one to redeem. And so in a lot of ways, we see this also as a part of this. You know, ultimately, anti-Semitism isn't just against the Jews. You ask people, they say, you're the chosen people, why are you chosen? And many times people will say, in looking at history, say, we're chosen to suffer. They think what we're chosen for is to suffer because that's where it's been. But in reality, when you see anti-Semitism, when you see anti-Christian things, when you see all these things happening, in a way, it is an attempt to get at the things that are cherished by God and try to tear down the credibility of God by saying, see, he didn't care. But you see the hand of God moving in a family like this. And for all the different stories, you can buy the book. It's got a lot of interesting stories. She says, I'm not a speaker. She's a storyteller.
Yes.
And the combo is very, very good here. You get all the background stuff and then boom, all the hard stuff. And we thank you so much for sharing that. But, you know, I think what we also have to remember too is that people are not our enemy. There is, as we see in the scriptures, an adversary behind all of that uses people. And we want to be able to be, God says he creates us, he created a man in the image of God after his likeness. And I often remind people too when they say, well, if God created man in his image, why does man do such terrible things? And I always remind them, I said, you know, in the garden, there were two image makers. One was the image of God, and the other was the serpent. If you look at what Adam and Eve did, they took on the image of the serpent. So if we find ourselves in situations where all we do is accuse somebody else and make them the scapegoat, we've not done anything positive, but we have taken on the image of that second image maker, the accuser of brethren. And we need to be able to always take on the image of God that is looking to believe the best of every person, hopes are faithless under all circumstances, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things, knowing that God is with us and will carry us through. So even with Joshua, when it says to him, don't be afraid, don't be dismayed, that means Joshua was afraid. How could you follow in the footsteps of Moses? And so obviously he's afraid. God doesn't waste words. He says, don't be afraid, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And it's that understanding of his presence that moves us from a place of trying to blame somebody else, or blame ourselves, or blame the son-in-law. And then find out that behind it, God was working. He never left. He was there. There's that story, I'll just add this one thing. He says, you know, that picture that they have where a person says that God was with him all the time, and he said he saw the footprints in the sand, and you've heard that? And he said, where were you? All I saw was one set of footprints. There were two. Now there's one set of footprints. Where were you? He says, those were my footprints where I carried you. And God is always there for us if we will reach out and let him make himself known. And thank you so much for sharing. You know, her family, she mentioned, work in theater and all of that. And I think it all carries through. Somebody has to be the storyteller. Somebody has to come back and be able to share so others will know, because nobody else would have known if these stories were not somehow carried forward. And this family was saved for a purpose. And we never have to think in terms of why me and not them. And I think, take 30 seconds. It was brought out to me, first time I ever say how the great generation, the ones who went to war and the ones who died and all this. And I remember in the movie Saving Private Ryan, there was one scene at the end, and I never understood until that moment where all this sense of patriotism and commitment came from. And it was as he was there with his grandchildren behind him, and he's there at the grave of the man who helped save his life, and all of them were gone, and he said one thing. He said, did I live a life worthy of what they paid, of what it cost? And I think that's where we look and say, do we live a life worthy? Numbering the days, looking at the value, and doing what goes on, not just hiding somewhere, but you are sharing something that people need to know. And we're so grateful for you coming and sharing it with us. blessing of Beth in our lives. We'll have her back again for
broken crystal, broken glass, dark haunting visions that never pass, broken hopes and shattered lives. We suffered through the years, yet we survive. Save us, O Lord, with your power and your might. Raise us, O Lord, and bring deliverance in the night. Lift us up, O Lord, from the places that we fall. Save us, O Lord, and restore us to our call. Faded dreams, a fragile heart. We need deliverance and a brand new start. Yes, broken dreams restored again by the hand of God and not by man. Save us, O Lord, come and make your presence known. Raise us up, O Lord, and turn our heart into your home. Save us, O Lord, let your healing rivers flow. Raise us up, O Lord, restore our heart and help us grow. From a trail of tears, a wounded soul, touched by your love, can be made whole. With hope regained, our spirits rise. You answered us, O Lord, and heard our cry. When we said, save us, O Lord, from the terrors that we face. Raise us up, O Lord, so our fears can be erased. Save us, O Lord, so that we can clearly see. Raise us up, O Lord, 'cause only you can set us free. Yes, save us, O Lord, we put all our trust in you. Raise us up, O Lord, so that we can make it through. Save us, O Lord, but not just to survive. Raise us up, O Lord, so we can soar and learn to thrive. Yes, we can soar and learn to thrive.